It was extremely delightful to meet so many old friends, some of whom I'm now meeting after 7-8 years, I think, and some others that I met for the first time today and getting introduced, and hopefully friends with a platform like HMA. And I'm also happy to talk about agriculture, putting it in the theme of the year for HMA that you picked up for the current year, that when you think of agriculture, normally digital doesn't come top of the mind, but since you picked up the theme digital for the current year, I thought it will be a good combination to engage with. So what does actually agriculture in digital era mean? Is it really glowing plants on the keyboard? But let's just look at a little video of one of the different things that happens by leveraging different digital aspects in agriculture. Make out, although the video was somewhat unclear with all this light and all that. Essentially, there is a sensor which is scanning, measuring the size, measuring how ripe the vegetable is, and thereafter cutting, locating its space, and stacking it in a basket and so on. You know, I was looking at different faces. Some were curious, but many were shrugging, saying, you know, what all this? This doesn't make sense in India. Maybe it is somewhere else. It makes sense. We have a lot of labor who will go pick up something and all of that. So does it really make sense in India? So that's what I saw. And much like this. But you know, some of you would be familiar with this model of phone, mid-90s, when you had the banana-shaped phone. And those of you from that times will remember that, yeah, now Shravan is remembering the number also, 8110. So the cost of a call at that time was some 16 rupee 40 paisa a minute.
Incoming also.
Even outgoing and incoming. So at that point of time, if one had asked, what will this do, this mobile phone, at that kind of a cost and whatever it is, I think it is something for probably the very elite, not for us for sure, and so on. Today there is nothing more ubiquitous than a mobile phone. A number of states are saying, in number of cities, even before the freebies on food, there are freebies on Wi-Fi's. And I think that's a shift. And we just saw Jio launching pretty much voice free. And so I think all of this was something that was inconceivable some years ago. So it's not very different from what we just saw in that video and said, yeah, this is not for us. So when it comes to digital, for that matter, any field where digital is applied, I think it all boils down to imagining the possibilities. So what can you think of doing with this digital? That really will hold the trick in terms of what can happen. Like mobile phone has become pretty much everything in our hands. There is no reason why digital can be integral part of agriculture. And what we saw there was just one example of what can happen by leveraging things like sensors. So I think what I'll walk you through are several such things, some of which are happening already elsewhere in the world, some of them are happening in India. But what we'll see, so I'll place before you three different aspects which really will determine how we can leverage digital in agriculture. So first of them, like anywhere, is the consumer. So if you look at what is happening to the consumer in India, and in case of agriculture, let's talk about food consumer. And today's consumer is actually seeking variety. If in the past, things like rice and wheat were the staple in a diet composition, a large part of that is now giving way to fruits, vegetables, milk, meat, and so on. So seeking variety is one aspect of consumer behavior, that what is available from a fair price shop, what is available otherwise wherever you can get anything from, was good enough. But today when the consumer, at least a significant part of the consumers in India, can afford to pay for what they are buying, and consequently obviously are expecting quality in the food that they're buying. And going further deep in quality, the expectation of safety is now paramount. Food safety is a very big concern, and especially when it comes to giving food to children. Somehow the grown-up have become immune to whatever is happening, and therefore at least when we are raising children, let's give safe food is something that parents think about. And convenience is another aspect the consumer is looking for. Convenience while buying, convenience while preparing food, convenience while consuming food, and so on. So therefore all these different aspects are things that the consumer is seeking, that any economy must deliver to the consumer. So only when you create value for the consumer, rest of the business falls in line. So therefore, this is something that we keep in mind as one dimension of the context. The other dimension, when you talk of farmer, what comes to your mind is a helpless farmer who is always saying, this is what is written in my fate. Partly because of policy issues. If water is free, electricity is free, you pump whatever amount of water without bothering about what tomorrow will hold for me. And the result is that obviously at some stage you're not going to have water. So therefore, that becomes another issue. Something less recognized, like water, is the topsoil. The amount of topsoil erosion that is taking place and the importance of topsoil in raising the agriculture productivity is less understood obviously amongst the urban folk, but even less understood also in the farming and farmers themselves. So consequently, this becomes another natural resource that we need to worry about. And so therefore, the result that we would really like to see is more sustainable agriculture. So you need obviously a healthy earth in terms of replenishment. Now, some of you would be familiar with this date called Earth Overshoot Day. So in a year, we consume some amount of natural resources, and in a year we can replenish natural resource by virtue of whatever activity that we undertake. So some 15 years ago, we started measuring as a society to say that how much are we consuming vis-a-vis what we can replenish. So if you do both in an equal year, obviously you consume and replenish by December 31st, you're just about well balanced. But now, as years progress, this year, in 2016, on August 9th, was the Earth Overshoot Day. We are borrowing the natural resources from our children and their children. So, borrowing from grandchildren who are not even here is what we are doing to Earth with respect to natural resources. So that becomes as important a factor as dealing with the consumer and the farmer that we talked about in the other dimensions. So when you talk about context, these are things that we need to keep in mind as to what can digital do in this context for agriculture. Now, all of this requires knowledge in terms of how do you grow crops, how do you align quality, how do you reach them to consumer, what does the consumer want, and so on. When you look at what knowledge is available, the knowledge is all over the place, whatever actions that I need to take. So one of the things, if we have to deliver the consumer changing needs, change the farmer into a happy farmer, and be sustainable in terms of what we do with earth, personalized and customized knowledge is one requirement that we have. The other, so all of us know that time is money. But in case of agriculture, time is even more money. Because if you sow your seed a day too early, again it's a problem. A day too late, it might be a problem in terms of what yield it can get. If you don't deal with a particular crop protection in a particular manner, when some pest or insect attack is there, so the whole crop may be lost. Or you may have sub-standard quality output that will not fetch the same price. So when time is of essence everywhere else, time is of even higher essence when it comes to agriculture. And therefore, the other requirement is real-time information. I should know weather forecast. Now, weather forecast, it's not good enough to read in tomorrow's newspaper as to what happened yesterday. At this time, I need for me to take some action on what should I be doing with my crop. At this time, I need some information on where the prices are going to go for me to take a decision which plant should I grow this time. So each of these information have to happen on real-time basis to be able to make a difference to all the three dimensions that we talked about. Now all of this will have to happen with our farmers and farms remaining small. There is a common refrain saying that no, we will be where we are because our farmers are small. when the farms become really big, many of these issues can be solved. We just talked about the equation of what will happen even when we are half of our workforce in agriculture becoming a quarter, the number of new jobs that we need to find in manufacturing and services looks completely out of whack. So therefore, it is unlikely that our average landholding size, which is hovering around a hectare, even if all kind of consolidation, you can't conceive that going beyond 2 hectares, 3 hectares. If you are really crazy, you can say it might even become an average of 4. That itself is completely out of the context when you have to think. So even at 4, it is still a small farm. So therefore, whatever that we are thinking of doing, this personalized knowledge, real-time information, has to be done in the context of small farms. Because we can't be wishfully thinking one day farms will become large and then we will have our agriculture prospering and our consumers' needs getting met and our earth becoming more sustainable. So that becomes a caveat. So that's the context. So in that context, if you have to look at what can digital do? So digital, what are its capabilities? How do you integrate those capabilities to try and engage with this agriculture that we talked about? So as we all know, what can digital do? Obviously, it can store information, it can retrieve information, it can throw that information into different devices, whatever you're having at different places. So data is at the core of your digital. And when we talked about knowledge, information, all of them boil down at its lowest denomination to data. Where does all this data come from in case of agriculture? Now, we saw some kind of sensors in the video at the beginning. And so you can very well have a number of these kind of sensors right on the ground to look at what is the moisture, what is the nutrition, and so on. And the way the cost of sensors is coming down, all of these are now becoming realities. It would not have been conceivable 5 years back to say that can we think of putting sensors in an agricultural field. But like I began saying, if you imagine the possibilities, it's only a matter of time before the cost equations adjust, because the volume at which then you can operate for these is phenomenally different. So if you can put sensors to see whether my lights should be switched off or should be dimmed, or my fan should be rotating faster, which is another kind of issue of sustainability and convenience, there is no reason why we can't afford to put them on the plants for the kind of reasons that I had described. Or you can put sensors anywhere else in the plant. You have fruits, and some of this is what we saw in the video also for a different kind of a crop. You can look at measuring literally anything on a plant by putting appropriate kind of sensors and then sending that data out in terms of, again, similarly, what stage of ripening is it that is ideal for harvesting, and if you need a delayed ripening at an early stage, how do you harvest and put it back wherever in the delayed ripening chambers and so on. So therefore, sensors not only on the ground to measure a few things, but also on the crop, whether it's on the leaves or on the fruits or vegetables or wherever else. Or not just on the ground and on the crop, but just completely go out of Earth. Today, the global satellite observation system is probably more crowded than the Earth itself in terms of number of satellites that are out there. There's literally no inch of Earth that is left that you can't scan at a regular frequency. So I think all of that is something that you can really pull as another piece of information. Let's look at what can happen through another video.
Hi, I'm Casey Birchmeyer with Successful Farming. I'm joined here today with Dave Gebhardt of Winfield. So Dave, today we're talking at Tools of the Future to farmers about satellite imagery. What role does that have in agriculture today?
Well, historically, satellite imagery has been used to provide historical information about field variability, and today we've really moved much more to how we utilize in-season, more frequent satellite imagery to help farmers make management decisions during the season.
Give me an example of what a farmer can find in his field using in-season aerial imagery.
Sure. I mean, really, just about anything that has to do with plant nutrition, plant pests, diseases. One of the things that the satellite imagery is used for is using for early season nitrogen management. The imagery is very indicative of nitrogen loss variability and can be used to put variable rate prescriptions together.
So how does satellite imagery fit into everything else that's going on here at Tools of the Future? We're talking about drones and different technology. So where does satellite imagery fit?
You know, one of the reasons we got into satellite imagery a few years ago was that it was fairly well developed and commercial in other parts of the world. We do see satellite imagery complementing very well with a lot of the other technologies here at the Tools of the Future. The drone work, that's just another form of remote sensing, which is the same as satellite imagery. The crop modeling products, like with Climate Corporation, all those tools together make up a toolbox, I think, that are going to work very well with the satellite imagery and provide the farmer with the best recommendations.
Great, thanks, Dave.
So again, you saw those possibilities of what all can happen. Now, obviously with the convergence of media, literally any content can be delivered through any device. I think that's the era in which we are living, and therefore whether you're looking at images or audio or video, and all of this can come through any kind of a device that one is holding, and all of us are experiencing it every day. So I don't need to really elaborate on that, except that this could be taken to farms as well. Now, when you look at a crop, you look at these leaves, one a healthy leaf and other has got a disease. Now, this is one of the areas when we talked about personalized information as well as real-time information. Now, a farmer needs to figure out that what disease is this. Some knowledge will be residing within the farmer, with the rest of the community. And quite often, the problem is that there are supposedly more learned scientists, extension workers, are not necessarily available at that point of time when something is required in the village, because there are only so many of them, and obviously most of such people are not necessarily living in villages. And consequently, when it is required and when it needs to be known, and then what needs to be done as a protection, and therefore what needs to be bought and applied, is the knowledge that is really required. And like we talked about in the earlier slide, that any content can be delivered to any device. But now, any content can also be produced from any device. I think that's another capability that we can make use of. So this plant picture can actually be shot through a mobile phone. Gone are the days when you required extremely hyper resolution kind of thing to figure out what actually it means. So today, for a normal telephone with just about 5 MP kind of a resolution, if you shoot, there are well-trained back-end algorithms which can recognize, compared with a library of diseases that are already pre-stored in that, to say what problem is this. You narrow down from the issues that the farmer is facing, and they say therefore can also trigger in terms of what else can be done besides what you may be already thinking about. So therefore, mobile as a device, not only in terms of delivering through to a last mile, but actually creating the first mile content which can really solve the problem. It's not some generic thing of saying that, okay, these are 5 types of diseases your crop can have, and therefore these are the kind of things that you can do as one way, what you felt as last mile, and the whole word extension came from that kind of a paradigm, that somebody knows some knowledge in a laboratory and that needs to be extended out to the land. Now, today's situation is that you need to carry that back to a central library where you can compare, where if it requires human intervention, it can. But otherwise, there are enough and large libraries that are built to say that now how do you really image recognition that is otherwise. I mean, like you put a picture in a search, you can get back to that page or text. So that's an application that all of us are used to. But actually putting it for a life-saving use is the value that the same technology can do, so long as your algorithms are appropriately developed and trained for these problems. So there is much more of such sensing which is possible. So in terms of things like infrared imagery, all of this that can. So in addition to far sensors on the ground, on the plant, through the satellites, you even look at drones at low height that you can pick up. I think this is not running very well. So all of this, what it leads to is a farming that can be done a lot more precisely, and what is called a precision farming. That, okay, some of this may instantly be more applicable to larger farms with 1,000 acres being cultivated by one person. But if you just reimagine the same thing by saying that, yeah, there may be several people on the ground requiring that customized knowledge and real-time information can be delivered as a service for them to do some of these manually, or some of these can be semi-automated. But large part of this technology of precision farming can actually be made use of even on small farms by slightly adjusting for the models there. And as the world actually predicts, the future farms are smaller and smarter. Fleet of agri-bots, smart tractors which receive information there from everything that we spoke about so far. What is called texting cows. So if you are putting in some of these sensors, there are already livestock farms in India, forget about elsewhere where this has been invented a few years ago, that depending on how much time an animal is taking from the place where she is eating to where she is resting, you figure out whether the cow is healthy or not. And then accordingly segregate and take whatever action. Things of that kind. So that's what we call texting cows, and many other farming data that is also possible. Now to the last section. Yeah, we said what is the context of agriculture? What are the various things that digital can do? But all of this only happen when at the end of the day somebody makes money. Otherwise it will only be wishful thinking, saying that, yeah, probably in a welfare state government will do something. Some of that is actually happening as part of Digital India. But it will only go that far. It will not really transform unless it really becomes a profitable activity for somebody. And that happens through business models. How do you innovate business models that are relevant for Indian agriculture, making use of all of these digital capabilities? So I will just share with you 3 business models as an example of what can be done. Again, like I began, it's all about imagining the possibilities, and then you test them out and put them in place. So first of these is really in terms of a fundamental shift that should happen, that so far we were a production-driven supply chain in our agriculture and food economy. That farmer could produce whatever he can and then brings it forward to a village trader or to a market yard or to a wholesaler, as the case may be, or to a food processor and so on, and then eventually it reaches out to the consumer or a food service location. And that is one of the big reasons as to why there are price volatilities that we discussed earlier of 40 to 100 rupee vegetable at one point of time and not even worthwhile plucking them from the farm at the other end. Now, if this changes to a demand-driven value chain where a farmer produces based on the consumer demand. So India is fortunate that we have such a variety of agroclimatic zones across the country and the weather conditions such a manner that around every urban agglomeration we can produce nearly 2/3 of what that location will consume. It's not like the United States or Europe or Australia where you need to produce in one corner and lug it all the way to the other corner of the country, and there are only some seasons that you can produce given the extreme weather conditions that exist. That, yeah, you still need to bring other 1/3. When it rains too heavily, you can't produce a few things, or when it is extremely hot, you can't produce a few things. Context is what is called, this is a picture of what is called a daily dose farming. So every day you harvest one patch from here. You can have slightly larger patches if you are really selling to a larger market. So you don't produce your whole area with one crop entirely and one day you harvest. Then it's an all or none gambling. And especially when you are really keeping your eyes at the back of saying that last season onion price was 100, therefore I'll now plant onion, and every other farmer in the neighborhood is growing onion, and obviously price will be worth nothing. So idea is that when you stagger your harvest of multiple crops, our climate supports it, and then you are in a position to spread out that risk much better. So therefore that consumer connect needs to be supported by a back end, which is a dosage-based kind of thing. That in turn needs to be supported by a nursery you have on your own farm, because you can't otherwise just plant a seed and hope that I'll harvest one day later or 1 week later. You strengthen or harden your plants or saplings inside a greenhouse or some kind of a shaded location so that you're protecting it from the adverse weather outside. This could be done by every farmer, as we have seen across in many places, or it could be done for a cluster of farmers by a few of them. But this whole staggered harvesting is backed by a nursery to be able to do this. I mean, all of this obviously you can't do for 100%, like I said, there is, within certain limitations of agroclimatic conditions, you can do this. So role of digital obviously is in connecting consumers to the farmers. And obviously when you place your orders, I think a lot of us still here go out to shop to buy a few things, but pretty much at home all of us are aware that the younger generation hardly goes out to shop. And there is no reason why food and agriculture products can't be done in the same manner, because here, given the perishability, it is even more required. And when you're saying demand-driven agriculture, it is even more required. So from that context, I think this is the digital contribution to that. So that's one kind of a business model, and a number of people that I'm associated with are doing this on a small scale just yet and slowly expanding in multiple cities. And I think I see this as one of the growing trends, that you get your vegetables and fruits at your doorstep, and that is ideal for you as well as ideal for the farmer who is growing it, and the way it is done with customized knowledge is also good from an environment perspective. The other is the model for delivering farming services per se. So not every crop is amenable to that kind of situation. Something has to go through processing, something gets stored for a longer period of time, something is not retailable. So therefore there are a number of crops that also still need to be grown otherwise. So therefore they get then segregated value chains. And in those kind of cases, it is possible to build farming services. In fact, one of the most understood or underexploited, we exploit even if too much of a word just this time already, because it's not even understood very well, is the services opportunity in agriculture. When you think of services, different kinds of things come to your mind, saying that, okay, if this is agriculture, that's manufacturing, that's services. But I think a sunrise kind of a sector is services in agriculture, which is providing services to the farmers. And a lot of them will be relying on digital as the platform. So one of the issues we already talked about is weather. So based on weather forecast as the core, and then building crop management advisory, input delivery, and other kinds of things on top of that is one kind of a service that many startups are doing now. So you get your weather information right on the farm through your mobile phones. And quite often in terms of what you then do with many of these knowledge, earlier I talked about that it is not necessarily just a scientist sitting somewhere else that who know everything, but farmers themselves. So some of the things which are now becoming more popular is the video shot by the farmers themselves and uploaded for videos to be consumed by farmers elsewhere. So that's another contribution of digital, because your largest and fastest growing platform today that all of us use is YouTube. And a lot of it is user-generated content. And there's a good reason for farmer-generated content for farmers to use as a lot more credible kind of a thing. There's a good example of that. Hyperspectral analysis is another part of digital that, much like earlier, we talked about through any means of sensors, which is either near or far or anywhere in between. And then the whole field can be assessed, whether the crop is healthy or stressed, or there are weeds, or there is some deficiency in nutrition. And then accordingly the advice can be fed back. So therefore, either weather forecast based or some testing based services, besides the routine tests like your soil test and so on, there are more advanced tests which are linked to digital that are now possible, that you can have field entrepreneurs who are providing these agri services that I talked about, who are connected with firms that provide this kind of a back-end engines to you upload a picture, or you gather some remote sensed colors from elsewhere, or you get a drone flying over a field and then pick up that sensing, and then you micro products you bring back to the farmers as to what care one needs to take there. So there's a Japanese company which is doing all of this already, all of this, building the second business model, and just look at what they're doing.
To give a fillip to farming, companies like Fujitsu are promoting research to bring in innovation through information and communication technology, or ICT. In Shizuoka Prefecture, the company runs a project called Akisai, a cloud computing service to support farming. In this greenhouse, various types of environmental data is collected and an appropriate condition is automatically controlled from the computer center. Since climate change is a big concern in Japan, it is important to control the environment for greenhouse horticulture. The environmental control box is the information gateway to the computer center and is the intelligent operator of the equipment. Akisai is already used by about 160 clients, including educational institutions, where future farmers study streamlined operations and business management.
農地の分散、あるいはまとまった土地が取りにくいという日本の条件において、いかに大規模化していくというのは非常に重要な競争力になるというふうに考えております。日本においてコンビニエンスストアの事業モデルが世界に非常に競争力を持ったというのも一つの特徴的なことと考えますと、分散しながら大規模化していくという意味では非常にクラウドコンピューティングと親和性が高いというふうに思っております。ぜひ農業に携わっている方々、これから農業に参入していこうと考えている方々と一緒になって日本の農業、世界の農業を ICT を使う形で変えていけたらというふうに考えております。
A few miles from Tokyo, there is a farmland in Yushiku City in Ibaraki Prefecture. It is managed by Aeon Agri Center, a subsidiary of the Aeon Group, which is the largest retailer in Asia. The 16-hectare farm, including 1-hectare greenhouse, cultivates vegetables such as cabbage, Chinese Japanese cabbage, and spinach. There are 14 direct management farms in Japan, and the produce is shipped directly to AEON Group retail outlets.
すべてのグローバルギャップという、世界的な基準を用いて、安全安心の部分を担保しようっていう形で取り組んでいます。
AEON is also working on data utilization in agriculture. Use of ICT greatly improves agriculture skills and techniques in the field.
これがセンサーの本体になります。で、この下に、土の中にちょっと埋めてあるものがあるんですけど、そこから EC であるとか pH であるとかから土壌の水分含有量ですね、そういうものを吸い上げて、で上にカメラがついてますんで、カメラで土壌の生育状況っていうのを定点的にずっと写真を撮って、土壌の条件がこういう状況の時はこういうような生育状況になるっていうのをこう紐付けてですね。
The employees also use mobile phones to collect data on production operation results and growth. The data is shared with all 14 farms through the internet.
すべてクラウド上にたまりまして、誰からでも見れるようになっております。リアルタイムで常に閲覧できます。
Fujitsu provides innovative support services that use data in managing and problem solving in agricultural operations.
同じ失敗を繰り返さないためにも、このような記録を残しておけば積み重ねとなり、自分たちの技術力の向上にもなります。
By the analysis of data, it is possible to optimize the scheduling of tasks such as watering, fertilizer, and harvesting without relying on instinct and experience. This is the new form of agriculture that AEON is aiming at.
So a lot of what we discussed in 1 and 2 are already being done, as you've seen here. And the last bit is really about the third business model, just to briefly share as to where we are heading in ITC with the eChaupal model in the context of the digital economy, is what we now call the ITC eChaupal 4.0. So we moved 3 versions over the last 17 years since this model has been in operation. I think what is happening here now is the digital magnet is getting built and prototyped at this point of time. The idea is that much like a lot of us are engaged in the social media that is relevant for the urban people, very similarly there are a few things which are relevant and appropriate for the farmers and the rural folk. So that kind of digital media is what is being built as a magnet. There are currently 2 of them being prototyped. One is linked to the production of open pollinated crops, seed production for open pollinated crops, because most of the seed companies focus a lot more on hybrids and GM seeds and so on. So therefore it is far less profitable to engage with open pollinated crops. So that we found as an attractive community-based operation that can provide one magnet, and that is being digitized at this point of time. And the second is the entire value chain related to skill building of rural people. While a lot of money is being poured in by the government into skill building, again, a lot of it is built in the conventional model exactly like what we spoke about in agriculture. It is essentially a production-driven supply chain, just saying that no, we will train so many people and then they'll find jobs. The far less of demand-driven value chain being built there. I think that is the other area we are prototyping 4.0. So to widen it beyond the agriculture, the 4.0 as it is conceived, and as were already 2.0 and 3.0 as well in some sense, is now building that. So by the time this gets scaled and rolled out, it will be another 16 months or so. So this is essentially as we sequence from the conventional eChaupal where people are physically meeting to the original eChaupal as it was conceived, to where people congregated around a computer system because that was the only source of information. Now to a digital economy where the whole world is in the hands of every individual. So that's a kind of a context for which this is being built. So on top of that digital magnet that is getting built are what we call the digital rails, essentially borrowing as a metaphor from the magnetically levitating rail system. So if you have a magnet, there's something levitating on top without necessarily touching it. So therefore, the basic magnet is a free system that is operating, which is really driving people onto the platform, and the commerce levitates on top. So every other thing that I talked about so far as services that can be provided are being delivered by one or the other company. So in 1, 2, and 3, partly digital. Say if about 10-15% of that is digital. In the 4.0, it will become maybe 40% digital. And some of the services will be near 100% digital. So each of those services are really becoming plug and play. So I talked about image recognition by photographing plants and then sending it to backend is a Swiss company which is riding on this. So those kinds of things of somebody else who is really providing, translating remote service data into crop management advisory, someone else is specializing in that. So many of them plug and play onto this broader platform that is getting created, whether for the space of agriculture or in a broader sense out of agriculture as well. So I think that's what we are building. So platforms are the third kind of a business model that can really enable many of the other services that we talked about in 1 and 2 also as a service. So ecosystem as a service on digital platform, riding on the digital magnet that is being created is the 4.0 business model. So I end there. Thank you for your patient listening. Although I know agriculture is somewhat an alien subject to this body, but that's what I have for you. Thank you.